Okay. So guys, it keeps disconnecting. I relocated. Hopefully it doesn't disconnect now. Okay. So, sorry guys, it keeps disconnecting. I think 5 minutes of the last thing I was saying was disconnected, but whatever. Anyways, what is the invisible? The invisible for human consciousness is the domain where subjects, you can say in subjects, internal objects, same thing, and inner films and pictures move for an unknown viewing and witnessing force. You know, guys, I envisioned, I don't know if I'm still around in this world, you know, I would like to go around the world and kind of activate people's inner realms through workshops and whatnot. You know, I think I'm going to have a lot of writing workshops in the future. If somebody says, Mr. Within, what has been one practice that you have been, you know, a spiritual practice you've been doing, one thing that's been constant, aside from speaking, has been writing. I am, people don't know this, I have a comfort in writing that way before the talks, I mean, what can think about it? Who can an introvert, shy person that doesn't trust himself or others in the world, who can that person talk to? And that's the beautiful thing about writing. Writing is kind of like getting to see what your mind is doing while it's doing something, you know? You know, there's a lot of people who discover and they realize non-duality, and they think that non-duality is the only truth. Non-duality was what we were for billions and billions of years. You know what I'm saying? We had no sense of our own individualism, where our idea of dualism and non-dualism comes from, right? So the invisible, I mean, as a person, as a being in this world, if somebody's like, Mr. Within, what kind of framework to, like, what sort of metaphysical framework do you see to reality? I've divided it into 3 categories. These 3 categories feel spot on to me. That human life, conscious human life, is happening in 3, call it rooms, call it 3 beings, call it 3 dimensions, you know, call it 3 aspects of yourself, whatever you like to call it. But for me, there is a visible dimension, there is an invisible dimension, and there is an inconceivable dimension. The visible dimension is in front of your eyes to some degree, majority of it. You know, it's in okay, let me say it this way. The visible dimension, by visible I also mean tangible here. The visible dimension is your body. That means right now, my biological existence, that means my protocols for my visible dimension functioning in my visible dimension is very different than my invisible dimension, right? So my visible dimension is like, okay, you got to eat food, drink water, find shelter, regulate temperature, communicate, like have sex, all of this stuff, that we require for survival. But when it comes to my non-physical life, my invisible life, the invisible dimension, this is not something. My invisible life can't have sex. Do you understand what I mean by that? The idea of me can't eat food, can't drink water. That idea, that inner realm ego, the ego can't touch anything, so it's kind of like enter the body to make it move, but the ego is not us. What that means is the ego is an Iron Man suit. If Tony Stark is running to hug his kids while he's wearing the Iron Man suit, well, guess what? It's like, that's wrong. But if he takes off the Iron Man suit and then hugs his kids, it's like, okay, what a good dad, And the Avengers franchise, all it had to do was get these Avengers to marry each other and have kids. You understand? I don't understand why the Avengers thing stopped, Like, you could just endlessly create films. It's like, yo, man, I'm seeing the 14th grandchild of Iron Man in the new Avengers, 14th generation great grandchild of Iron Man, it's like, yo, it's Golden Man, it's Platinum Man, it's Magnesium Man. It's Plutonium Man. No, I'm joking. Who knows, man? In the future, there might be a huge industry of Iron Man suits. I hope to, one of the most beautiful scenes I've seen in a Japanese comic book turned into an anime. Okay, there was this one on Netflix. It was called The Irregular at Magic High School, and so it was like this agent that had gone to this high school, but in the anime they had depicted a scene that has never been created on TV, okay, in cinema, right? And they depicted a scene where there is a guy who's inventing flight, and only you can do this in animation. People think like, yo, man, animation, serious? In animation, there is storytelling capability that we cannot budget in reality if you want to make it, make that scene. Right? So whatever, in this scene, what it was that it was depicting the first time an inventor had created flight, and he calls his sister into the room and he shows the flight, and it was such a cool, I think, if somebody tells me, out of all the types of inventors in the world, which is the coolest inventor to be, I would say the inventor of anti-gravity flight, like floating. That would be the coolest inventor. Imagine you invent something and you start flying in the air. Oh man, what a beautiful, like, that to me is like one of the most beautiful moments ever. It's kind of like what the Wright brothers felt. When the Wright brothers actually flew with a plane, they were like, no way, are we like demigods? Like, what is this? We have ascended to the level, like we're doing something no human being can do, has done yet, Isn't that where the fascination is? Aren't we fascinated by all those beings that are doing things we've never seen before? Like, that's what's fascinating. It's not fascinating to fit into how the past was, because we already know how that was. Do you understand? It's kind of like, recently this year, my experience and view on religion and the idea of God has changed. It has changed in a way more real way. But anyways, the main point of this episode is that not all problems are visible. Sometimes when you look at something, it might be like, I'll give you an example. You look at a cake. Okay, let's say you're someone, you've gone to a store, you see a cake, and it's like a rare cake, and it's a good cake, and let's say you look at this cake and you're like, yo, man, I gotta eat this cake. And so you see no problems. You're like, yo, man, I don't see a problem with this. I'm just gonna eat one cake. You don't see the problem of what you're doing. You're giving your, for example, with cigarettes, right? How it started for me was cigarettes. It's usually it's anybody who experienced some sort of defeat in their life. I think this is my opinion, right? Cigarettes comes to those who are like in the trenches of reality, you know, in some sort of trench-like situation in reality. It's kind of like cigarettes. It's kind of like there's this pressure that subconsciously you can't. You know, it's like you're on. It's like because you haven't met your own expectation, then you kind of allow yourself to get hurt, which is the problem. How the addiction kind of starts. Okay, but anyways, I mean, this is one person's view. Best time to quit cigarettes is before you smoke your first one. Because there's like, you know, in the future, I don't know why people haven't done this. We're making spaceships. We've created hyperloops. Do you know what I'm saying? We've created next level technology, but we haven't managed to create cigarettes that heal people. Do you understand, cigarette companies? If you create a cigarette that does the opposite of what it's doing, everyone will buy your product. Do you understand? You're just doing something that's doing the opposite. No. If you can turn poison into medicine, that's a victory. That's one of the genius chess moves of our species. It's literally, it's a sort of alchemy of chaos into order. And you know, sometimes people's minds are different, right? So, recently, there were, I had an experience, a psychedelic experience with friends. And in this experience, I began to notice that my mind was constantly trying to reset the moment. I'm someone who, when I go in a situation, a part of me, this is something I learned. But intuitively, I felt I knew always, but I learned consciously. There was a time where I visited Florida and I met someone who was a soldier. And this person told me that anywhere he goes, the first thing he does, I was asking him about like, yo, what's like about the archetype of being like a soldier or something. The guy had a very unique presence. Like this kid, he was younger than me, but he had a presence that was like military level. Do you understand? All the time. It was strange, right? And so I asked him, I mean, it wasn't strange. It was strange for me. I hadn't seen something like that. Such a solid composure. It was as if he didn't have emotions. Even when it was okay to have emotions, like you didn't have emotions, it was like watching it was like a statue moving. You understand? So I asked him, and he said the first thing I do is I scan the environment, scan everything in the environment. And I thought that was very interesting, because if you look at birds, you look at the head of a sparrow on a tree. I don't know if you've ever done this. You look at birds. Birds are like the most advanced surveillance cameras. The neck of the bird is like moving multiple directions in nanoseconds. Do you understand? Like in 1 second, the bird's probably seen like 5 angles. Do you know what I'm saying? Maybe not 5 angles, maybe like 3 angles, But they have incredible fast neck movement. Right? So something is that when you enter a new outer realms where your brain is unfamiliar with, the brain is tasked with familiarizing it. And sometimes even we think of subconscious things like intuition or conscience or moments where it's an emergency or something's dangerous and we feel like, I'm getting a feeling not to go there, or I'm getting a feeling not to do this, or I'm getting a feeling to leave. There was a time I was in a place and I was playing one of my talks in front of other people, and in the middle of my own talk, there was a point where I was saying leave. I just said the word leave, and I was like, imagine I'm in a public place and I'm hearing my own talk and there's others, and in my talk, the talk says leave. Like I hear my own voice say leave, and I just get out of that moment instantly. It was one of those unique moments, you know what I mean? It was as if like my past self was telling me to like dodge this moment, go forward. You know, there's been times, let me tell you this, there was years ago, not years ago, like 2 years ago, there was this girl that anyways, long story short, I was getting close with, and suddenly out of nowhere the logos told me, if you go with this girl, it will be the end of you. Literally like a sentence. Imagine I'm there on the phone, like wanting to continue texting, and literally the sentence, as if somebody told me, if you go this path, it is dead. It is the end, you know? And so there was something that I was like, maybe my subconscious mind, my preconscious mind, as Freud would say, has noticed something about the situation that my conscious mind, the tip of the iceberg that's outside of the water, hasn't yet. So there is that, you know, and I get feelings, you know, I mean, everybody's like this. Every person you see, like, you know, there's something happens. The mind is very fascinating, you know. You could put like two people in a room and they could all act in a certain way, but what is going on behind their minds could be completely different than how they're expressing themselves in the outer realms. This is why when you think the world is just a nice place and you're honest, the naivety becomes a destructive consequence. Why? Because people are not what they appear to be. I know this because I've been communicating for like a decade. And I've noticed how every day it's just about the nature of attention. Where your attention is, your identity is being found, is being extracted from. So, the inconceivable dimension is an attributeless witnessing presence of the whole moment. The invisible dimension is your inner realms, and it is your mind, and it's how objects, internal objects, can move in front of internally before they move externally. That's why we have minds, to live before we live externally, to live internally before we live externally. And I don't know, there's something about these Mr. Within talks that I give that there is a refreshing feel. Every time I give the talks, I feel like I'm surfing. You know, or I feel like I'm on the highway and I've put down the window, and like that wind on a sunny day, you know. If so, we've come to this idea of what is an invisible problem. And I guess this is where I'll put the notepad away and just... Creatures born in a conditional reality. And what conditional means is really what consciousness is doing. You know, in mystical circles, there's a discrimination between awareness and consciousness. Consciousness is conditional to form, and awareness is unconditional. And what this means is that what we are being, or how we are being, is different than what we are being. And so maybe the species can recalibrate. Do you understand what has happened? It was as if civilization 1.0 was the best prototype of our ancestors. It was the first prototype. It was the best they could do. And so we are living in an uncalculated civilization. We are living in a civilization where, rather than 8 billion human beings having an honor for constructing it, we are deconstructing something that we feel we didn't make, right? The biggest issue in the world right now is that we have forgotten to be responsible for the efforts of all those human beings that have lived so far. And if we fail, if we make unnecessary mistakes among all the generations of human beings that have lived, we will be the foolish. And so, do you want to be the fools of humanity? And for how long shall we stay a fool? Let's say you're someone who you think that being a fool is humility. What if that's the most foolish thing? What if humility means that once you are righteous, you can accumulate? That once you understand the way the game works, you can play on the soccer field. And the beautiful thing about when it comes to the past, we can see the problems visibly because they've passed. When it comes to the present, you can usually see the problems, but when it comes to the future, we cannot see. And all I'm doing is just pretty much what I'm doing is literally trying to visualize how the future would look like, its chaotic and ordered probabilities, and try to respond to it now. Because what is a greater game than the past, the present? And what is the greatest game the present can play? And the answer is why you wake up tomorrow. So if not all problems are visible, it's a suggestion that when we look at a situation, we may not be aware that there are problems there. It's equivalent to like buying a house. You buy a house, when you bought it, it was perfect, and then you suddenly notice all the little details that you couldn't notice until you lived in it for a while. So what this means is marketing in nowadays is selling, artificial perfection. You know how easy it is? I could be like, yo, everybody, here's the secrets. Come and buy this course, da-da-da-da-da. And then you'll be like, yo, what did I gain? You just gained the language I had seen before. And what it is that there is no time to make a decision that slows down the advancement of the species. This was very savage for me, but I had to accept it. That means if it's more efficient for others to be on the soccer field, then I have to be in the sidelines. It doesn't matter. But if I see that there needs to be a substitute, then instantly I go in, So anyways, I don't know what else I can say here. Okay, let's answer the question. What is an invisible problem? It's a problem in which its existence is not clear, but its potential. It's a probable problem, right? For example, who was it? It was Seneca, this ancient Greek philosopher, and he said that most people suffer in imagination than in reality. So most people are suffering for something that doesn't exist rather than that which actually exists. So an inner realm problem would be how you're suffering based on something that is not present. Okay, for me, I have certain invisible problems, right? One of my invisible problems is the future of the species. It's not real now. Right now, the species is like getting by, but in the future, I can envision problems. I can, for example, envision children getting lost in cyberspace, So, with the pleasant sound of this car beside me, I guess, what can I say? How can there be an invisible problem? Because the visible solutions, the solutions we give to visibility are not visible. We find invisible solutions to visible problems, so that proves that there are invisible problems if there are invisible solutions. So I'm saying there's invisible problems because we're using an invisible approach, a non-physical solution to a physical situation, right? Like, what is consciousness? Non-physical solutions, a physical problem. So when we think of an invisible problem, we have a suggestion that there is a non-physical force that is giving a solution. So the non-physical force must have considered a non-physical position to the problem. So this could be said, this is another way of saying, even though we appear as objective physical beings, but life is actually a non-physical internal event, calculation, and then an outer one, right? So really, like let's say an atheist scientist goes to some simple religious guy, and it's like, yo, how dare you believe in God? That's fiction, right? And then the religious person could be like, how dare you believe in yourself, who's saying God doesn't exist, because that's fiction also. Your body is real, sure, but the idea of you that is moving your body, I can't touch your ego. Anybody who I have a twin brother. When we would get into deep philosophical arguments, there'd be a point where I'd be like, yo, you have an ego, and he'd be like, no, you have an ego, and we'd be just like pointing like, it's your ego, it's my ego, that whole thing. All that I'm saying is, if there is a visible life, an invisible life, and an inconceivable life, and positions where attention is presenting itself or finding itself, then it's another way of saying that whatever we calculate about what we are, it's impossible to be, because if we identify as our mind, we must be everything that is part of the mind, right? That means it's kind of weird, isn't it, that I'm saying this mind belongs to my body, but from the mind's perspective, consciousness is experiencing the whole moment at once. So it's kind of weird. It's like my brain is in my body, but the way I'm experiencing life is like my body is in my mind. Do you understand? It's like the body is in the mind and the brain is in the body. But we think it's the brain that's creating the mind, so we think the mind is in the body, which could be an error. Anyways, thank you for listening. Share, subscribe, comment, like, join, and I guess answer the question. How can there be an invisible problem? I'm saying because there is an invisible eventhood of the solution. But then we can also get into the ontology. How can something invisible be anything, right? And it's only in shape, I would say. But anyways, wonder about these. Comment in the chat section, guys. I feel like if you've listened to a talk like this, most likely you must have opinions. So you can share it in the comment section, I don't know why, but I had this feeling in the future, all these comment sections of these talks are going to become the most academic, comment section ever. Do you know? Because I'm kind of in between, so I feel like it's going to become, I don't know. One of my visions is anyways, these are all in the future. Anyways, thank you for listening. Rise, mankind, rise. And if you don't want to rise, what else can you do in this world? Rise, Thanks for listening. Namaste.